I don't know whether my poll numbers go down, they go up. I don't know what happens in terms of Democrats versus Republicans. But here's what I do know. I do know that this bill, this legislation, is going to be enormously important for America's future.
Well, we've been telling you about the historic health care vote this weekend. President Obama pushing until the very last minute to try to make sure health care passes with this historic vote this weekend.
But if it does pass, there could be major consequences, including doctors leaving their field. Dr. David Kloth is both a doctor and a small business owner. He's against the Democrats' health care plan and says he's on the brink of rejecting Medicare patients. Doc, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Staggering number, 30% of primary care doctors said they would consider leaving their field if this bill passes, which it appears it's going to. Why? What's the problem?
Well, I think that the doctors are concerned about coverage for their patients and proper reimbursement from Medicare, and also about rationing. There's a whole component of this where the government is going to decide what treatments you're allowed to get, what you're not allowed to give your patients, and so they're going to actually dictate what care is allowed in this country and what is not.
So if someone comes to your office looking for Medicare, looking for care over the next few months after this bill passes into the next year as this thing starts to take hold, can they expect that you might have to reject them?
Oh, it happens all the time even now where I have to tell patients, I'm sorry, you don't meet specific Medicare guidelines that allow you to have this treatment. And so I have to constantly tell patients, I'm sorry, you can't have that specific treatment. And it's just going to get worse.
Well, there's actually interesting up in Washington, Walgreens have said no new Medicare patients because they're losing money on some of their reimbursement for their prescriptions. And doctors will get cut 21% for their Medicare reimbursement if, in fact, this bill passes. What will that do to the state of Medicare? Because they're going to have an additional 10 million plus patients in Medicare.
What you have to understand is that most medical practices run about a 50 to 60% overhead. If you take away 21% of the income, that's about half of the doctor's income to take home. They're not going to have a choice. They're going to have to cut staff, which is going to increase unemployment. They're going to probably drop Medicare. I can tell you almost every doctor I've spoken to says if the 21% goes through, they're going to drop Medicare.
They're going to drop it.
It wasn't socially acceptable to drop Medicare, but it's going to become if this goes through.
The question we keep hearing from President Obama saying the quality of care will go up. The quality of care will go up. You say that's not the case?
I disagree. I think the quality of care will go down because the Comparative Cost Effectiveness Committee, which will be really made up of methodologists and not practicing doctors, is not going to be able to understand the literature and the research adequately. The government needs to work with doctors much more on this. And the reason the doctors have not bought in is that we don't have enough say in what is going to happen. And the government needs to work with us and take our input into how we're going to cover treatments. We know how to control costs. We know where the problems are, but they're not talking to us. I've written to President Obama and I've written to various Congress senators trying to get our voice heard, and they just don't want to listen.
Yeah, it's frightening to figure where these 30 million people are going to get care. We know they're going to have insurance, but who's going to treat them?
You're going to increase the number of people covered, but there's not going to be doctors to treat them because doctors are going to leave medicine in droves.
Even if they don't, though, won't there be a shortage of primary care doctors in this country?
Yes, absolutely. There's going to be a shortage, and this is not going to stimulate more people to go into primary care. It's going to obstruct people because a primary care doctor office really runs a very high overhead, and so these cuts will have dramatic effects on them.
And well, finally, you're going to see a lot of people not going into medical school altogether?
Yeah, that's...
You may see that as well, and that's sort of one of the predictions, that people will stop going to medical school. People who are on that border ready for retirement will retire early. My group has discussed dropping Medicare if these go through, and I can tell you that's a global discussion going on in medicine today.
Dr. David Kloth, we appreciate you joining us this morning. Thanks for shedding some light on this.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Coming up, Ken, another medical story that's very...